Hello, and welcome to our webinar, Riveting and Page-Turning YA. I'm Sarah Hunter, editor of the Books for Youth and Graphic Novel sections at Booklist. Before we begin, I'd like to go over some technical details. The audience is in listen-only mode, but we welcome any questions you may have. On the bottom of your screen is a toolbar with a section for Q&A. If you have a question or need technical assistance, simply click Q&A and type your message into the box that appears. We will do our best to respond to all tech-related questions, and we'll pass along all other questions to today's panelists so they can follow up with you after the webinar. Also, Booklist offers closed captioning on all webinars. To enable or disable captions on your screen, please look for and click the live transcript icon on the toolbar mentioned above. From there, you can select Show or Hide Subtitles from the menu that appears. If you choose to enable subtitles, you can adjust the size of the captions at any time by selecting Subtitle Settings. We have a wonderful panel planned for today. We will begin the webinar with a brief presentation from each author, and then we'll move to the Q&A portion of the webinar. But first, let's meet today's panelists. First up, we have Karen McManus, author of Nothing More to Tell, E. Lockhart, author of Family of Fires, and Gina Chen, author of MADE of Thorns. We'll begin the presentation portion of today's event with Karen N. McManus. Karen is a #1 New York Times and internationally best-selling author of young adult thrillers. Her books include One of Us is Lying series, which has been turned into a television show on Peacock, as well as the standalone novels Two Can Keep a Secret, The Cousins, You'll Be the Death of Me, and Nothing More to Tell. Karen's critically acclaimed award-winning work has been translated into more than 40 languages. Welcome, Karen. Tell us about your new book.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, and thanks to everyone who is joining. I wanted to start by showing the wonderful book trailer that my publisher created for Nothing More to Tell. So hopefully this technology will work. I'm just going to go ahead and start this and let you all watch and listen. Okay, and that is coming out next Tuesday, August 30th. And I'm really excited for people to read it. Nothing More to Tell is my 6th book. It is a standalone young adult mystery, dual points of view. It is the story of Bryn, a teenage journalist who is investigating the cold case murder of her favorite teacher, whose body was found by her ex-best friend turned nemesis, Trip, and he has the other point of view in the novel. And these two characters are really dear to my heart. It was really interesting to write from their perspectives. Bryn is somebody who has a lot to prove. She's returning to her hometown of Sturgis, Massachusetts, which is where the action takes place, to a private school called St. Ambrose. And Bryn left 4 years ago when she was just 13 years old, very shortly after her teacher's death. And right around the same time, Trip ended their friendship in a very public and very embarrassing way, and Bryn has never understood why. So she's coming back feeling resentful that she has to go back to this town that caused her a lot of pain, but she's also looking to kind of redeem herself because she's a student journalist. She recently was the victim of a prank at her old school, and something went viral that was very embarrassing to her. And she really wants to have a new story to focus on that will remind everybody that she's actually great at what she does. And she's come across a true crime show that's now based in Boston, and realizes that she has the opportunity to pitch the story of her teacher's murder, which was never solved. And his body was found by 3 of her classmates. And he's a teacher who's really special to her. He's someone who inspired her to start writing. And that's something she never thanked him for. And that's something that she's always regretted. So she's coming back with a lot of baggage, and she's coming back with a bit of an agenda. Trip, on the other hand, is someone who's been in Sturgis this entire time. And the two kids that he found the body of Mr. Larkin with were both very wealthy, very privileged students who he barely knew at the time. But suddenly they're a trio and they kind of ruled the school. But Trip is a scholarship kid. He is desperate to get out of town. He has a mom he barely sees and a dad he lives with, but hardly talks to. There's a really complicated family history there. And Trip has always been very steadfast in that the story he told of finding his teacher's body is very simple. There's not much more to it. And anytime anyone has ever pressed him for more information, he's always said that there is title alert, nothing more to tell, which is where this came from. So as the story goes on, we start to unravel these two characters. We start to unravel the mystery. We learn that there's, not surprisingly, more to Mr. Larkin than Bryn, as a 13-year-old, understood. There's certainly more to Trip. He is lying from the get-go, which is not a spoiler. I'm pretty sure it's in the summary for the book. And these two need to reconnect, learn to trust each other before they can get to the bottom of what really happened.
Thank you so much, Karen. Our next presentation will come from E. Lockhart. E. Lockhart wrote the New York Times bestseller, We Were Liars, and the upcoming Family of Liars, a psychological thriller. Her other books include Fly on the Wall, Dramarama, The Disreputable History of Frankie Landau Banks, and the Ruby Oliver Quartet, which includes The Boyfriend List, The Boy Book, The Treasure Map Boys, and Real Life Boyfriends. She also wrote How to Be Bad with Sarah Mlynowski and Lauren Myracle. Visit her online at emilylockhart.com and follow her on Twitter at @elockhart. Thank you for joining us, E. Lockhart.
Hi, thank you for having me. I love nothing more than getting to chat with librarians, even if I can't see you. So thank you for coming to hang out with us today. Family of Liars is out. I'm going to show you the trailer that Random House made for it. It came out, I think it came out in June. Anyway, it's been out for the summer. It's currently number 4 on the Times list, and this is the trailer that Random House made for me. Okay, and as you can see, they're working the heck out of the Karen McManus quote that Karen was so kind as to give me for family. So thank you, Karen. Okay, so this book came about in a funny way, really. I wrote a novel called We Were Liars that came out in 2014, and it is set on a private island off the coast of Massachusetts that is owned by this one family, the Sinclair family. It's an amnesia story. It's a tragic love story. It's a mystery, a thriller, and it has a big plot twist. It also makes people cry. So this book did totally nicely when it first came out and then was quiet, as almost all books are after a year or so. And I didn't really think that much more about it. I went on and wrote other books. And then during the pandemic, as you might know, it came back onto the bestseller list, where it has now been for 2 solid years, and it's currently sitting at number 1, which I really can't believe. And when it first happened, I especially couldn't believe it because it was an old book. So the question was, what was happening? And the answer was, of course, book talk. And these mostly teenage, mostly female creators were making videos of themselves, and some of the videos were very creative. Some of them were, negative about the book. Some of them were aesthetics, where they pieced together kind of collages of imagery connected to the story. And the majority of them were videos of people crying. So they would film themselves reading the book with snot and mascara and sobs heaving. And this turned into this super lucky for me viral marketing that brought a lot of people to the story of We Were Liars. And so I suddenly had readers for this novel, which was so magical and surprising to me. And I had talked a little bit to Random House about trying to find a follow-up novel for We Were Liars, back when it had first come out. And I don't think it's too much of a spoiler to tell you that it is really not a novel that lends itself to a sequel. There was basically no way I could write a sequel that I thought would be satisfying to my readers. So I was sort of in despair. I felt so lucky to have these readers, but I didn't know what to do about it because I didn't have a story. And I'm friends with this novelist named Gail Forman, who wrote If I Stay and We Are Inevitable and many, many other beautiful and touching YA novels. And Gail and I live in Brooklyn, and right outside my window here is a park. And we are middle-aged ladies and we like to go on walks, and we kind of speed walk through this park, and it takes about an hour to go around the loop. And so I went for a walk with Gail, and she had her dog. And if you have ever met Gail, and given that you are librarians for young people, you probably have, you will know that she is a very forceful personality and does not mince words. She has strong opinions. And she was like, Emily, you have got to write another book in this world. You have got to write another book set on this private island. You have got to do it. And I was like, why? And she said, because you have readers. She said, it's such a hard game writing stories and sometimes we do it when we don't feel like anybody is waiting to read our book. And you do have people who might be waiting to read this book. And so she forced me to think of stuff while we walked around the park. And she would throw out ideas and I'd say, no, that's not what happens. No, that's not what happens. And as I did this and rejected Gail's still very good ideas that I didn't like, I realized that if I was saying that's not what happens, then I kind of knew somewhere inside me what really did happen. And so I wrote a prequel. This is it. It takes place back when the people who are the parents in We Were Liars were teenagers. It is the story of 3 Sinclair sisters who spend every summer on this private island. And the summer that our narrator, Carrie Sinclair, is 17, following an enormous and invasive involuntary jaw surgery that has changed the way she looks, and left her with a codeine addiction. She and her sisters are going to spend the summer on this private island, and their lives are completely upturned by the arrival of a literal boatload of cute boys and 1 girl. So these 4 new people show up on the island and everything goes topsy-turvy after that. So that's Family of Liars.
Thank you so much, E. Lockhart. We'll now hear from our final panelist, Gina Chen. A self-taught artist with a degree in computer science, Gina generates creative nonsense in all forms of media and always has a project stewing. She has a particular fondness for fairy tales, demon tales, romantic comedies, and quiz shows. Currently, she resides in Southern California, where the sun is as plentiful as its tea shops. Violet Made of Thorns is her debut novel. Thanks for being here, Gina.
Hello. Is my video on? Oh, okay. Hi, I'm so thankful to be here. And I'm also so thankful that Violet Made of Thorns has found such a wide audience in its first month out there, and that I'm here talking with these seasoned authors now. I'm just like, I've only been an author for a month, I feel. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about Violet. Violet Made of Thorns is about a young seer who can see the future, but doesn't always tell the truth about it. There's a terrible prophecy surrounding the cursed prince that might bring about the doom of the kingdom if he doesn't find a bride and fall in love. And Violet gets entangled with him in more ways than one. I call it my fairy tale for cynics. Violet is this very self-aware, snarky narrator, and she illustrates this world with sort of this playful modern voice. It's for readers who love fantasy media that can be fun and over the top while still digging into themes about heroes and villains and love. And I think unusually it's appealed a lot to readers who love contemporary YA, but in a different setting. And I also don't think this is an accident because it's a very character-focused coming of age. I'm a very character-focused writer. And it just happens to be set in a fairy tale kingdom. And Violet happens to be facing adulthood and shaping her identity as her decisions affect the fate of the entire world. If you asked teenage me to name you a contemporary YA that reflected anything close to my experiences as a Chinese American, I would not have been able to do it. They might have existed, but it would have definitely been hard to find. I'm so glad for the diversity of voices now because the landscape has changed so much and we can have stories of every kind. But this is why when I was younger, as an avid reader, I gravitated to classic novels and fantasy novels instead, because unlike a lot of contemporary YA novels at the time, which 99% of the time from the first pages expected me as a reader to be a member of like white suburbia and relate to white suburbia a certain way, no one expects me to be a sword fighting elf or a magician. Not to say that fantasy novels don't also assume you're white, but the expectation felt different and many themes and character arcs automatically felt more universal because it was placed in this different setting. So that's how I came about to write fantasy. So Violet's big problem in this fairy tale story of hers, she can talk to the gods in charge of destiny, and she is told from the very beginning that the prince must die and that her role in that will be fixed one way or another, and she's not going to be the hero of the story. Violet, being her stubborn self, is like, no, I don't care what the gods say. I have a choice in this. Now, Violet wouldn't normally ever call herself a hero. She is very pragmatic. She will save herself first, but she also really hates being defined by other people, even if it's literally gods. She will literally try to defy prophecy just to prove a point, just to say, ha, take that, and avoid being complicit in murder. And that's not the only figure in her life that's placing these unwanted expectations on her. Everyone from the king to the prince is trying to define her for their own reasons, for political power that hangs in the balance. But if you forget about the gods and the king's part, that's quintessentially what growing up feels like. The people who raise you or grow up with you can place all these expectations on you, and maybe you feel beholden to them, or maybe you feel trapped by them. Maybe you feel like your future is already decided because of them. And society places these expectations on you based on how you look, your job, where you grew up, and so on. So that's very much like the meta fairy tale element at play here, where characters are usually assigned a pretty strict role. You are the prince or the witch or the hero or villain. How do you deal with all of that? When introducing the story, both the readers and I like to latch on to defining Violet as an anti-heroine. That's another important driving factor behind why I wrote Violet the way I wrote her. She's a sneaky, selfish character. She tells lies, obviously. She helps the king manipulate people. She's not brave and she's not interested in saving the world, and she might even, damn it, if it means saving her own life. But she also grew up on the streets, and she grew up with these guardian figures who always rewarded her for selfishness, for her skills and her talents, and not any kindness or softness that lives in her heart. So this is the way she grew up, and this is the only world she knows. A lot of people talk about anti-heroines as if they were always villains and monsters, which I find really interesting because I think in recent years, it's been a very gendered thing, specifically after Gone Girl blew up and made that specific archetype very trendy. When I think of anti-heroes, I think of like Batman, arguably someone who is more hero leaning. I think of them as heroes who struggle with being a hero because they don't believe in themselves or believe in the world or can't decide whether the world is worth saving. So that's Violet's whole deal. That's closer to Violet's whole deal. I don't think Violet wants to be cruel, only that it is easier to be cruel or necessary to be cruel for her own well-being. And I think if she simply reveled in taking power, her choices would be much easier. So I want to push against this sort of girl bossification of strong female characters, where any instance of ambition or grab for power is always the choice that makes the female character better and gives them more agency, when no, you have to factor in what they're defying and what the character actually wants. So for Violet, taking things is the easy choice, but at the same time, her selfishness does give her the momentary agency and power in the court, and she does have to indulge in that once in a while just to survive the world, even if she doesn't necessarily want to be that person. That's the tightrope she's on. And her story explores the conflict that arises when you feel yourself becoming the villain you don't want to be, but from the side of someone who has never viewed themselves as a hero their entire life. All that aside, this story is also a fun fantasy romance. And I feel like this story always has something that's followed with a but. It is also a little bit of a subversion of commercialized ideas of romance and happily ever after, and the ways we treat love like it's a prize for the protagonist and not like something that is sometimes the messiest part of our lives, especially in our adolescence. So in Violet, things like happily ever after and true love are used by propaganda. They're used to make political alliances palatable and ease people's fears of the future and convince the prince to marry someone he might not plan to marry. So I can think of few better things than a fairy tale to illustrate what it means to have a society that treats a love like a prize that way, like something only good people deserve. You know, love and falling in love, it is a complex emotional experience. It can be toxic and obsessive, frustrating and unwanted, and something that interferes with your responsibilities or tears your heart into. And Violet and the Prince are kind of all the above and all that. So these are the major things that drive Violet. It's a little bit of everything I care about and everything I love, and I'm excited to talk more about it.
Thank you so much, Gina. So I would like to invite the rest of the authors to turn on their videos. I will turn on my video as well, and then we can start our conversation. So you've each touched on this a little bit, but I'd like you to speak a little bit more directly to what inspired each of your books. Gina, I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about the inspiration, the specific inspiration for Violet Made of Thorns.
Oh, I feel like I just covered all that. I'm like, oh, now where to go on? No, I think that is pretty much. I did my whole spiel there. I think I will give the other authors a chance to talk.
Okay, sure. Yeah. Karen, why don't we talk to you then? Tell us about the inspiration for your novel.
Yeah, you know, this one, it's not a bolt of lightning inspiration, which sometimes it is. You know, with One of Us is Lying, I heard a song, I wrote a book. It was very straightforward. This book had a different kind of journey. One of my favorite books is The Secret History by Donna Tart, and I read it every year, pretty much. And I love the character of Julian Morrow, who is the teacher of these 5 students who become involved in this murder mystery. And I always loved the fact that they revered him so much that they couldn't really see him as a person. You know, he was almost like a god to them. They couldn't see his flaws until the very end. And I always sort of wanted to write a story centered around a teacher like that, somebody who influenced a student. And given the kind of books I write, I thought I would probably kill that teacher. And his former student would probably investigate the murder, but that's not a plot, you know, that's just an idea. And then I think it was back in 2019, you know, readers kept asking me for a sequel to Two Can Keep a Secret. And I never had any plans to do that, but I thought, okay, if I was going to do it, what would it look like? And I started thinking about the protagonist's twin brother. Maybe he could be a main character. He was a DJ. Maybe he goes to a radio station. There's a true crime podcast. And it was so convoluted, you know, never would have worked. And also I did not want to undo the ending of that book. So that didn't go anywhere. But as part of my brainstorms, I kind of came up with the mystery side of what this cold case that was being investigated could be. And I decided to put those two together. I decided that my teacher's story would be a cold case being investigated by one of his former students, but also another former student had been one of the kids who found his body.
That's great. I'm really interested in true crime as an inspiration too for you, just because it seems so pervasive in our current media landscape. And I thought that you engaged with like the ethics of true crime and reporting on true crime in a really interesting way.
Oh, good. You know, interestingly, I don't think I've ever been inspired by an actual case. It's just not really how my brain works, but I am very interested in the environment, as you say.
Right, right. So Emily, you touched a little bit on your readers being an inspiration for this book that you have out right now. Was there anything else apart from the readership, like really dragging you to the story?
Well, during the pandemic, and I've since learned that this is actually quite a common phenomenon. My teeth started falling out, and I don't know how many of you, and I won't be able to learn in this webinar, have had a dream where your teeth fall out. But
Oh my God, all the time. All the time.
Many, yeah, dreams where my teeth fall out, and they were actually falling out. And it was very upsetting, the moment when I sort of really faced the fact that there were teeth missing in my mouth. And I went to the dentist in the middle of the pandemic. I was quite anxious about this. And he was like, whatever's going on here is beyond my pay grade. And that was really scary. So he, anyway, basically I went through a journey of dealing with my teeth. And part of that journey was seeing this very sort of masculine, authoritative jaw surgeon who recommended that I get a very invasive, sorry about that noise, it's New York City, very invasive jaw surgery. Where they cut open your jaw and then they put some stuff in there and then they wire it all back together, and then you have your jaw wired shut for 8 to 12 weeks, and you eat the solid food. And he had really convinced me that this is what I needed to do. So don't worry about this. I got my wisdom teeth pulled. I have Invisalign. Everything's going to be fine. But in the middle of this, it did not look like everything was going to be fine unless I did this surgery. And I went, of course, down the internet rabbit hole of reading about people's recovery from this surgery. And people have been, sort of maudlin and generous in their explanation of every single detail of recovery from this particular type of surgery. And you can see photographs of their faces, taken every 3 days, and you can see your details of everything that they ate. And it's fascinating, and was, in my case, terrifying. And I honestly, because We Were Liars is centered on a heroine who has a debilitating medical condition. We Were Liars, she has chronic migraine pain that is very debilitating for her, and a subsequent drug addiction. I was looking for a drug addiction for my new heroine, and a reason for it, and a medical condition that would change how she thought about her teenage self, her teenage body. But I needed it to be different from We Were Liars. And so as I passed through into other solutions for my own body, I wanted to make use of all this research that I did. And I gave this jaw surgery to my main character as a kind of first major incident that changes her sense of herself and who she is in the world and who she is in relation to her family, because they force her to have the surgery. And so all of that is to say, I mind my own medical neuroses for fiction.
That's fair. I mean, find it where you can get it, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
And speaking of noise, they're tearing down a building across the alley from my house. So if you hear a lot of clunking, that's what that sound is. So all of your books have a lot of big twists and turns and reveals. And I'm very curious from a craft perspective, how you keep track of that for yourself and as sort of behind the scenes for your readers. Gina, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, sure. I think mostly it's just, my process has been to revise a lot as I go. That's just generally how I am as a writer. So much goes on in a single scene between the characters and the plot and the subplots that I think just functionally my brain cannot hold it all at once. So when I write, when I start writing in order, I will write it one way, but I will go back to it maybe in a week, maybe in 2 weeks, and go write it's as if I wrote another layer on top of it. It's oh, these new character motivations, these new things I discovered as I continued writing. So it's that layering that builds up these scenes that slowly becomes twists and turns and big reveals. And for the big reveals, I do know them events, or at least I know something bad is going to happen here that is going to change the course of everything. Usually, usually if it's very big, I know exactly what it is. But I think most importantly, as an author, I think about the character motivations that build up to the point, and then the fallout. So, you know, the details can change, but ultimately what affects Violet, oh, she suddenly realizes this character is not trustworthy, or she's betrayed, or she realizes that love is not enough, or something like that. That shift will be the same. It's always the same in my mind. It's just, it might be the mechanics might be different. Yeah.
Karen, how about you? How do you keep track of your plots?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to say I have a really cool murder board that I could show you with red string going to all of the different suspects, but a lot of it is in my head. I do outline before I start my books. And so like Gina, I sort of know where it's going. You know, I know the big reveal, or at least I think I do. It's only changed a couple times when I've written a book. But you also have to leave that room for discovery, you know, so because I write multi-POV, I tend to write in cycles. And so whether I have 2 characters or 3 or 4, I will write those 4 chapters, and then I'll take a step back and think, okay, what happened? Now that I know these people a little better, now that their world is a little bit more built, now that the mystery started to unfold, let's go back to the outline and see if that is right. I also use a beat sheet, which I started using with my second book because I was having a hard time with pacing. And it's a great screenwriter's tool to remind you that, you know, just intuitively, as we consume stories, we expect certain highs, certain lows, certain big moments throughout the story. You don't have to have them at the exact same spot all the time, but you have to kind of be aware that they need to exist at some point. And so I found that really helpful. And I use that as well. I kind of plot out, okay, obviously I know my inciting incident. I know how it ends. Pretty sure where the middle is supposed to be, but what happens in between? And that's usually where I tend to plot the character moments. And in particular, most of my characters are keeping secrets. You know, their secrets are not always related to the bigger reveal at the end, but they feed into it. You can't get to the end unless you know what they're hiding. And so that's always, you know, a delicate balancing act of what do you reveal when, especially when you're dealing with multiple narrators. So it's very much an iterative process. I do have a lot of different outlining tools that I use, but in the end, some of it is just instinct and feeling like, you know, this is where the book is headed and I'm gonna follow it.
How about you, Emily? Do you have a big murder board?
No. I would just add that I plot things out in Scrivener, which is a word processing tool that allows you to sort of see your plot from a bird's eye view. And it has many, many, many complicated functions that I don't use and have never learned to use, but I use these kind of, basically, if you imagine your book is on a whole lot of index cards, and you can shuffle those index cards around and you can color code them for like an A plot, a B plot, a C plot, or for marking your love story and when it shows up, things like that. And I do a lot of, you know, placeholder scenes and rearranging and things like that as I'm working to structure the story before I've even written those bits.
This is not a question that I sent you ahead of time, but do any of you think of yourselves as like visual people? Do you have like a visual sense of what your story looks like, sort of just holistically? That maybe is a weird question to ask, but just the way you were talking about using Scrivener made me think of it.
I have a Pinterest account,
Okay.
as do many people my age. But one thing I do is I'm not envisioning the story so visually, but I am very often collecting images that are basically whatever, inspo images, mood images, character images. Sometimes I do research about a particular location. I did this a lot in Genuine Fraud, which has like all these bridges and landscapes in it, different cities and things like that. So that is very often something I return to in moments where I'm stuck or I just need a way into the kind of imagination that I had when I started the project. You know, I can sort of hang out on Pinterest and it helps me get back into that mode.
Mm-hmm. Gina, you were like enthusiastically
no, I probably have more of a visual background. I feel like I actually am more visual minded than I am prose minded. I think my ideal format is if I could like make everything a movie, but the movie inside my head. I think the way I imagine my story is usually like a movie trailer. It's not very crisp, it's not very clear, but I can feel the soundtrack. I can feel like the shots of the close-up shots. When I frame a scene, I often think of it framing it like a camera. It's like, what is the camera focusing on? What is my prose focusing on? It's very similar to me like that.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
How about you, Karen?
Yeah, my books tend to unfold like movies in my head. I very much picture scenes. I picture people very clearly. But what I am incapable of doing is translating that into the real world. I have no artistic talent whatsoever. Even images, I kind of struggle to pull images together that represent what I'm seeing in my head because it's so specific. But what I tend to do, I am very inspired by music when I write. I tend to create a lot of playlists for individual characters and then for the book as a whole. And that's kind of, if you want to sort of get to the mood of the book, sometimes that's the most helpful place to go.
I love hearing how authors think about their own writing process. I find that really, really fascinating. So we're mostly talking to librarians right now, and I think that talking about as many books as possible is always a fun thing to do with librarians in presence. So I want to hear a little bit about the books or stories that have shaped your writing as a whole. Like, what were the formative books or stories for you when you were a kid or starting out as a writer? Karen, why don't we start out with you on this one?
Well, probably not surprisingly, I loved mysteries when I was a kid. I started reading Agatha Christie when I was about 13 years old. I read And Then There Were None. And I remember my jaw just dropping when I got to the end and thinking, how is this possible? This story is just so wickedly twisted and I never saw it coming. And then I started reading it again because I wanted to see all the things that I had missed. And her mysteries remain an inspiration to me. I also loved fantasy when I was a kid. I loved C.S. Lewis. I loved Tolkien, and I read Stephen King as well, a lot of horror that was a little too old for me probably. And when I became a writer, I was inspired by Suzanne Collins. I read The Hunger Games, and for the first time in a long time, I was a kid who loved to write, but as an adult, I never even tried to pursue it. I wanted to try to create a world again because I was just blown away by what Suzanne had done.
Emily, how about you? What were your formative stories?
Well, I have a PhD in Victorian literature. So I think for me, when I chose to get that education, it was because of having, read in high school, Great Expectations, Jane Eyre. I love a good, Gothic story centered on a house, going all the way up through like Turn of the Screw and Brideshead Revisited, but also, Wuthering Heights and Bleak House. And so I think that, a lot of my writing is drawing from those Victorian and, maybe early 20th century English storytellers.
You can definitely see the fingers of that in all the houses that you write about now. Gina, how about you? What are your formative stories?
I think the stories you can see most in my writing probably come from Tamora Pierce or Terry Pratchett. They kind of, they have that strong heroines. They have the humor interspersed with these very deep themes that are talking about the world, that also treat the main characters with the kind of levity that they need, even as they're teenagers making maybe mistakes that we think are silly as adults. I see a lot of comparisons also to Ella Enchanted for my book, but like all grown up. I love Gail Carson Levine, and also Patricia Reed's Enchanted Forest Chronicles. That's probably one of my favorite ever stories. Just the idea of like, you can have a princess be kidnapped by a dragon and like be friends and have tea with them. And it's also just like the reversal of the idea of the dragon always being the villain. It just did so many things with tropes that I loved. And it would follow me, like, I think there's a lot of media like that in movies as well, that like I would love growing up, stuff like Shrek or the Black Knight. Is it the I don't remember what the title is anymore, but Gallivant, those musicals like Once Upon a Mattress. I loved all those things. So that's probably what built this book now.
Oh yeah, you can when you were talking about it earlier and you were talking about like your interest in sort of like subverting fairy tale tropes, that definitely has a presence for sure.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about what elements of a novel for you personally as a reader now compel you to keep turning the pages. Like what is the thing that like really draws you through a book? And Emily, why don't we start with you on this one?
Well, I'm a sucker for really pretty sentences. I mean, I think there's a lot of wonderful storytelling and great plotting out there in the world, and I certainly do love a good mystery. But I think that when somebody is a real poet, I'm grateful. Yeah.
Karen, how about you? What keeps you turning a page?
I want to get very deeply invested in the characters, and not just as individuals, but usually their relationships. You know, if there's some kind of conflict going on between two characters that I've become interested in, I want to see how they're going to resolve it.
Gina, how about you?
Yeah, I agree with both Emily and Karen. I think beautiful prose, but also when you do have to care enough about the characters to keep reading, and where they end up. It doesn't have to be cliffhangery. I love slice of life stories that explore the day-to-day. You find this a lot in Asian media and like the dramas and manga. Like some famous examples would be the Miyazaki movies, but there are many others. I love just exploring where a character will develop and how they will change from one phase of their life to another. It doesn't have to be imminent danger. I just want to see how they will develop as a person, because there's so many paths you can take. It's just that just reflect our reality.
Yeah, I love all of those things. That's one of the benefits of my job, is I just get to sit back and read and delight in reading. It's lovely. So what are some under the radar YA novels or nonfiction too that you wish more readers knew about? Gina, do you want to go first on this one?
Yeah, sure. I wanted to shout out Joan He's books, like Descendant of the Crane, The Ones We're Meant to Find, and Strike the Zither. I think she's writing really amazing, like very different genre mashups in her books, with characters that make the kind of mistakes I think real young adults make when they're put into difficult situations. And I think they're just incredibly imaginative. Like Descendants of the Crane is this sort of it is this like Chinese myth fantasy. The Ones We're Meant to Find is this sci-fi dystopia that deals with climate change, and Strike the Zither is based off of the Three Kingdoms myth. It's coming out in November, and that's going to be her first duology, so I'm very excited. The other one I wanted to shout out were the Jeannie Lo books by F.C. Yee, which I only got to read as an adult, but I think that was the first book where I like pointed at and very excitedly shouted. I was like, oh, this is so much like the Asian American teenage experience that I had as a teenager, because it was really one of the first books that showed an Asian American teenager growing up in a diaspora community where most people around her were also Asian. And that's kind of the community I grew up with.
Well, that is such a validating experience when you can see like a picture of yourself in a book, sort of.
Yeah.
Yeah. Karen, how about you? What are some under the radar YA books you wish more people knew about?
Yeah, I don't know if it's totally under the radar, but I think everybody should be reading Hollow Fires by Samira Ahmed, which came out earlier this spring. It's a mystery, which I love, because Samira writes lots of different genres, and I was happy to sort of pull her over to this side because she's very talented at sort of, fooling you, but also she maintains that sort of, very relevant and very personal storytelling touch that she brings to everything. And it's just a terrific book. And also within my genre, this one's a couple years old, but Swipe Right for Murder by Derek Millman, was one of my favorite books when it came out, and one of the few books that I have honestly like laughed out loud when I wrote it. It has such a great, when I read it, sorry, I wish I wrote it, right? It has such a great blend of humor and, you know, just lots of twists you don't see coming.
Great. You're next, Emily.
My favorite thing that I read the past year, or my favorite two, I'll say, one was A Lesson in Vengeance by Victoria Lee, which is, we talk about a book influenced by The Secret History. It's basically like, she describes it as murder lesbians at boarding school. I would add that it's got a sort of a witchy element and a mystery, and it's very like erudite and literary, and that was completely my jam. It was such a delightful dark academia thriller. And the other thing that I really fell in love with this year that I feel like not enough people are obsessed with is a fantasy called A Deadly Education by Naomi Novik. And it's magic school, very, very, very dark, really gorgeous prose. And it had like I don't know, I can't even, it's so good. It was so delicious and such amazing world building. The sequel is out now called The Last Graduate.
A Lesson in Vengeance is great. I really love that book too. And it's another one that's got just like a really good house. Don't you think?
Yeah. Yes, like this old special, small dorm that, like all these people died in it, and before that all these poets lived there or something. I can't remember the details, but yeah, you really get this feeling of like this one house that houses like 8 young women and doesn't have enough supervision.
Another great house book, and again, I don't know if this is like under the radar, but White Smoke by Tiffany D. Jackson. It was her first kind of foray into horror, and it's just got a fabulous like haunted house.
Oh, she's really a good writer, Tiffany.
Yes.
Yeah, she is. I really like the cover of that book because it just looks like it could just be like a character-driven novel based on like maybe just like a thriller, but then you see the haunted house sort of like secretly in the background.
Yeah.
Whoever designed that cover did a really good job.
Yeah, and it is very character-driven too. But then you got a haunted house, which I personally am always a fan of.
So what is your biggest influence that's not a book? We've been talking so much about books lately. Gina, what inspires you that's not a book?
I feel like I'm inspired by kind of like almost everything because I grew up, so I didn't like get to, like everything I got when I was a kid, it had to be something that was free online, free games, free TV, like on basic cable. And I was a kid in the era when the internet was blowing up, and so you could actually follow all the content that was going viral, not like now when everything is going viral and you have no idea what's going on unless you're in that specific niche. So during that time, I think it brought a lot of amateur voices and creators into the spotlight because you have all these, there were like so many of these narrative games, there were free web comics, and there was fan fiction, of course, which I wrote. And I think it's often this sort of imperfect, unpolished content that's filled with the love of the creator that fostered my imagination. Because the things that I absolutely adore, like the perfect book, it doesn't necessarily just inspire me to create, because in my eyes, you know, they've already fulfilled what they set out to do. I was like, oh, I'm satisfied with the story out there. But it's all this other media that's like not quite polished or perfect yet. I'm like, oh, that makes me want to pick up the threads and see what else I can do with that idea. So I think that's what inspired me the most.
Yeah. Emily, how about you? What inspires you that's not a book?
I didn't plan an answer out to this question. I had an unusual upbringing a little bit that has, I think, served me very well. My mom came from like a waspy New England family, and my dad is Jewish New Yorker, middle class, and it was quite a scandal when they got married because he was Jewish, and then they divorced quite young, and my mother became a practitioner of a new age religion. So we lived for about 5 years in communal living situations with other people who practiced her religion, and moved house year by year and lived with all different types of people. And I think then I was a scholarship student at some fancy educational institutions. And I think those several things that I just told you about myself, all of them, the thing they have in common is that I'm like kind of 1 foot in and 1 foot out of some kind of world, right? 1 foot into this WASPy world, 1 foot into the New York Jewish world, 1 foot into the private school world, 1 foot into the commune world at the same time, right? So that is a gift, to never be quite at home, right? It's not always fun, but it's interesting, and it is almost always the position from which I write.
It's really fascinating. Karen.
Yeah, I think, I'm probably similar to Gina. I'm inspired by all kinds of art, music, actual paintings hanging on a wall, help to inspire You'll Be the Death of Me. Definitely music, because for me, nothing really sets tone quite like that. And it's hard for me to really even think about getting started with characters and in a whole new world if I don't have some kind of musical backdrop behind me. But I know when I was writing One of Us is Lying too, I was, it was sort of the time when Pretty Little Liars was really popular. And I remember getting kind of sucked into that and really just enjoying going along for that ride. And I also rewatched Scream for the first time in a long time. And I just was struck all over again, like how well that movie does certain things, particularly its opening, the way it just pulls you in with that horror, but it's also so character driven. And the mystery is very personal. And those were things I kept thinking about as I was writing.
So this last question is like specifically for the librarians in the audience. We're going to give them some book display ideas. So I want you to imagine that your book is on a display, and I want you to tell me 2 or 3 books that are next to your book. So Karen, why don't you go first?
Okay, so probably I should just turn behind me and look. Okay, yes. Allegedly by Tiffany D. Jackson, Sadie by Courtney Summers, and That Weekend by Kara Thomas.
Very nice. Okay, Emily, you're next.
Okay, I literally have written down allegedly, Karen's books, and Sadie. And I added A Line in the Dark by Melinda Lowe. But actually, that's the display I see all the time. It's a great display. I think it works really well. But I would also situate my books with some coming of age thrillers that are for adult readers that are also about young characters. And there are some that I love so much that I thought I would name check those. So The Secret History, of course, Special Topics and Calamity Physics by Marisha Pessel, amazing. If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio, and Lucky by Marissa Strapley.
Very nice. Okay, Gina, tell us about your book display.
I think something like a little different and unexpected might be, well, the first one, I think the closest is Little Thieves by Margaret Owen. I think if you love Vanja, you will love Violet. It's actually quite similarly narrated, where it's very fun and very close to the narrator. And the other one I would choose is It All Comes Back to You by Farah Naz Rishi, because I think the main character, Karan, also makes the kind of messy mistakes that Violet also makes in love and protecting the people she loves. It would be like this kind of, messy heroine makes mistakes kind of display. So I think that'd be great.
That's great. I hope everybody was taking notes. Okay, so that is all the time we have for today. Thank you so much to Karen and McManus, Lockhart, and Gina Chen. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you today and hear about your fantastic books and the books that you like reading. Tomorrow, all attendees will receive an email containing links to today's video recording and certificate of completion. For more about Booklist webinars, be sure to visit www.booklistonline.com/webinars, where you can view archives of past webinars and register for upcoming ones like the ones you see here. Now you can share Booklist love with everyone connected to your school district, library system, or higher learning institution. Booklist Online Unlimited offers just that. Unlimited simultaneous access to 30 years worth of review and article archives, plus digital editions of Booklist, book links, Booklist Guide to Graphic Novels and Libraries, and Booklist Reader. For pricing and other questions, visit www.booklistonline.com/subscribe. Have you heard? Booklist Reader, our new magazine that offers reading recommendations to patrons of all ages, is coming to print this January. Go to www.bit.ly/booklistreader in print to find out how you can order print copies in bulk for your library. Already have a Booklist subscription? You can share the latest issue now. Go to our website for more details. Thank you again for joining us for today's webinar. And one more huge thank you to our panelists and to our sponsor, Random House Children's Books. This concludes today's webinar. See you next time.